So, my name is Talia. I'm a high school senior and I participated in MSEph for 1 year. And I'm so excited to be interviewing you today.
Hello, my name is Priyanka. I'm a rising junior, and I'm very excited to be talking to you today.
Nice to meet you too. I
Would
can
you?
start by introducing
Yeah.
myself. I'm Deb. I am currently a second year medical student. I go to Kansas City University. I participated in MSEph for 2 years. So during my sophomore year of high school and my senior year of high school. And it was a great experience. So I'm super excited to hear that you both are involved in MSEph.
Definitely. And could you start off by talking about those MSEph projects and what you learned from them while you were participating in MSEph?
Yeah, for sure. So during my sophomore year, I did a project on determining which mode of thawing food was safest. So I took like just meat I had bought from like a local grocery store, and we thawed it in hot water, cold water, room temperature, and I believe in the fridge. And then when like the meat was thawed, we like cultured the bacteria, and we did like some simple like bacterial counting and plotted it on a graph, and we did it in like replicates to see which method produced the least amount of bacteria, and then just like reported our results. That experience was my first time going to MSEph, and that was what I learned from that was just like your project like really, as long as it interests you, like and you're passionate about it, you can get far. Like we took something that everybody uses, like everyone cooks meat for the most part, and everyone has a different way of thawing their meat. Some people are like, let's throw it in the microwave. Some people are like, let's leave it out overnight. Some people are like, let's throw it in a bath of hot water. And just a question like that was so easy for me to assess in a scientific way. So I took a question that was like, everyone asked, and then, was able to answer it with science. So that was something I learned going there. And then looking at all the other projects at MSEph, it was really interesting to see like how everyone sort of like was doing a project in their interests. When you're in high school, like you have that sort of freeway, and science fair is a great way to like use science to answer a question or look into something that you're interested in. So that's sort of what I learned like the first time. The second time I went, I did a project on sticking with the food theme, determining what foods were genetically modified or not. So I took like tomatoes that I had bought from a grocery store and like compared it to organic tomatoes. And we did like a normal like PCR assay and did like a gel electrophoresis to see whether or not we got genetically modified food in like normal grocery things. And it was interesting. The reason I wanted to do that project was because in the United States, you're not required to label food if it's genetically modified versus in other countries you are. And, a lot of people think like when you buy organic food, like you would think it wouldn't be genetically modified. And, a lot of times it's more expensive. So I wanted to see like if that was something that was actually being sold, if that was something that we should start to market, like organic food is not genetically modified versus non-organic food being genetically modified. And that was during my senior year. So that one, I feel like at that point I was in the process of applying to college. So it was definitely more of a transition. At MSEph, I was definitely more so interested in like what colleges are here. I was able to win scholarship money that year. So I learned a lot about the college process that year, because just like talking with all my judges, like a lot of them were, in college or had gone to college or professors or whatever. And I definitely loved that conference with more of an idea as to what research I wanted to do when I got to college and what that experience would entail.
That's so cool. Your projects sound really unique and like really awesome. So thanks for telling us about that. So, would you mind, in light of your recent topic about college, would you mind describing how you got from those MSEF projects to college and where you are now? What's your educational journey been like?
Yeah, so after doing MSEph, and I went to UMass Dartmouth for undergrad, and I knew I wanted to get a degree in biology. I think that you know, having this hard science background, I knew that like it would give me opportunities to continue to do research on a higher level. So went to school and immediately joined a research lab. You know, with MSEph, like you really have a leg up because, you know, you've presented scientific research, you've done the work, you have that like critical thinking process, you know, you've written an abstract, you've written, you know, a scientific paper, you know, you've presented in front of peers, in front of judges. And a lot of those things, people, when they come into undergrad, they don't come into that with those skills. So coming into undergrad, looking for a lab to join, being able to talk about my science fair experiences, and then also competing at MSEph was really like great. Like a lot of my professors were very impressed by that. So I joined a research lab. We did genetics research. So I was there for all 4 years of my undergrad. And then every single summer, I also sought out research internships at different institutions. So during my first summer, I did a research project at UMass Medical School. And during my application process, I really talked about MSEph as like the catalyst for all of my research experience. So after that, I also did a research project at Weill Cornell in New York with their MD PhD program. And then I went on to do research on my thesis during my the summer between my junior and senior year. And I was able to not only finish writing a thesis, I graduated as an honors student. So I completed a thesis project there. I did a thesis, another thesis for my biology program. So had a lot of research experience in undergrad. And I really do think a lot of it was from MSEph, you know, just making those connections there and talking with the judges. And then after graduating from undergrad, I also got a research position at the Broad Institute. And I worked in proteomics there. So I was heavily involved in like mass spectrometry, a lot of analytical chemistry, biochem. And it's so funny because like a lot of the tools that you use, like the basic tools of writing like abstracts and writing scientific papers and like pipetting and like all of those things I learned when I was in high school. And I still use them, you know, even when I was like 6 years out in my job. So I did that for 2 years. And now in medical school, I'm also still doing research. I just finished a research internship this past summer, doing research on iron overloading in mice. So it really just like catapulted my research career. I feel like if I didn't have that MSEph experience under my belt, it would have made it a bit more challenging to get involved in research so early during my undergrad. So yeah, that's sort of how MSEph helped me. I always rave about how MSEph is like the greatest foundation for research.
Definitely. It's really great to hear that you use those MSEph projects to get where you are now and that you feel like you have accelerated skills under your belt. That's so cool and inspiring. And on that note, I would like to ask you, so you're working with a lot of different things now, as opposed to when you did those MSEph projects as a high schooler. So what challenges have you faced along your educational journey and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, I think there's so many challenges like in research and outside, but in my education journey, I think something that I struggled with, at least in undergrad, was like the timing. So I knew that like there was a possibility I wanted to go into medicine, and I struggled with figuring out if I wanted to do an MD PhD or go into medicine and not get a PhD. And then, you know, made up the decision that, okay, I'm going to go straight from undergrad. I'm not going to take any time off. I'm just going to go through it. And then, you know, junior year rolled around, and because I spent the summer doing my thesis work and research, I didn't really have time to study for the MCAT. So I had to delay that. And, you know, that was a challenge because I didn't know like really what opportunities there were to do during the time you take off. So obviously defaulted to research because that was like something I was comfortable with. And I knew I sort of enjoyed it. So having to like reassess and like replan, like, okay, I know I want to go into medicine, but I'm not quite sure which track I want to do right now. So let me take this time off to figure it out, study for my MCAT, and then make up my mind. After doing, you know, my 2 years of research and, you know, loving the work I was doing, I really had to like sit down and think like, okay, what do I see myself doing as a career? And while research is like a really big component of that, the type of research I envision myself doing, I can do with a medical degree. So that was like the deciding factor. And then I had to sort of reassess. So the challenge I think I faced was like really just like aligning my path and figuring out like what I needed to do to get there. And you have to talk to a lot of people, You have to consult with a lot of mentors. You have to talk to people who have gone through all of that in order to figure it out. And that takes time. That's something that a lot of people, like, you come in with a plan, and then when your plan goes south, you sort of have to reassess and adjust. So that was like one of the biggest challenges. Also, I think like opportunities, you come from a place like MSEph, which is like held at like MIT and like a great institution. And then I went to UMass, which is a smaller state school. I think putting myself out there was a challenge. Like, I really had to go above and beyond because I knew I wanted to have all this research experience. So like applying for internships, getting denied, and then, I was able to get a couple like at Cornell, at UMass Medical School, but it definitely was a challenge. So those are some things I would say that I feel like people will meet on their path.
Wow, yeah, it really sounds like you took the initiative to find those opportunities, and that's amazing that you have been so motivated this whole time to do what you're doing now and get to medical school. And so maybe could you talk a little bit about what's medical school like and how do you like it?
Yeah, so medical school is a challenge. It's 4 long years. So the first 2 years you are in the classroom. So you're taking all of your preclinical classes. You'll take anatomy, physiology, histology, all of the stuff you need to know to do well in the clinic. And then after your second year, you take what we call step 1 or complex 1 if you're an osteopathic medical student. And then you transition into your clinical rotations. Your clinical rotations during your 3rd year and into your 4th year are when you're in the hospital. You're shadowing, you're literally working alongside the doctors and the residents, and you're getting that hands-on experience. So you'll be working in pediatrics, internal medicine, family medicine, OBGYN, psych, all of it. And then during your 4th year, you sort of switch off because you sort of know at that point what specialty you want to go into. So let's say I'm very interested in pediatrics. So during my 4th year, I might do a bit more specialized rotations in pediatrics and then start applying to residency programs. Residency programs are what you do to train to become a physician. So you graduate medical school as a doctor, but then you still have to do some like clinical training, and that's what residency is. So that will be done during 4th year. So right now I'm in my 2nd year, and we're taking like our last year of classes. We'll be preparing for our first board exam, which I'll take next summer, and then heading out to the hospitals and the clinics for my rotation. So that's a little bit what it's like. We spend a lot of time studying, like 40 hours a week, if not more. But it's fun. Like, you have a lot of clinical experience. It's like I just had a mannequin-based experience this week where I was able to simulate someone who had like acute appendicitis. So like that was really fun and a great experience.
Definitely. Thank you so much for sharing your experience with medical school. And I do want to wish you the best of luck because it's such a tough field to be in. And also thank you for being in that field. And kind of diverging from the topic of medical school, you've done a lot of research along your journey. And what is your advice, if you have advice for someone who would like to go into research?
Man, I feel like I have so much advice. I feel like the first piece of advice is to seek out a mentor. Like when there's so many opportunities in research, but the research community, they're one big network, and if you have a mentor who can really support your goals, like let's say your mentor knows like my mentee is really interested in this topic, they can hook you up with someone or link you up with someone who's very interested or doing current research on that. They can also provide you with tools on how to be a strong applicant should you want to apply to that lab or program. I think my first mentor during MSEph really is the reason why I'm here today. She was so instrumental in like setting me up at UMass, at all my MSEph projects. She was really great in like preparing me for that. So a mentor first and foremost is really, really important. And then I would say like when you get into the lab, be open to learning. Like science is, I'm sure you guys know, like it doesn't work half the time and then the other time it does. Like, and you have to be open to learning from when it doesn't work. Be open to troubleshooting, because every failed experiment you can learn something from, like just because it doesn't work doesn't mean like you didn't learn anything. You learn that that's not the area you need to follow or the path you need to go down. So be open to learning because you will meet a lot of failure, but you shouldn't let it discourage you because that's part of the process. And the third thing is, I would say, like, don't lose yourself, because I feel like when you are in science, it's very easy to, be sort of consumed by your work. Like, it's one of those things where it's like, you can be in the lab for like 12 hours a day and not even know, because you're just so engulfed in what you're doing. But take time for yourself, because good scientists are the good people, the people that have interests outside of the lab, and are really well-rounded in their lives, and continue to do like community service and mentor the up and coming generation. So don't lose sight of that. Like, even now, as someone who's gone through MSEph, gone through undergrad and medical school, mentoring is something that's really big in my life, because I know how instrumental the mentors I had when I was in high school were. So giving back is always important. So looking outside the lab to see how you can help is something I would recommend.
Thank you so much for speaking about that and like how important it is to care for yourself and give back to the community, even while it might be kind of hard if you're caught up with work and things like that. So, also along the further topic of research, could you talk about maybe like the most interesting project that you've done and what was that like, or what did you learn from it?
Yeah, oh my goodness, I feel like there's so many that I have to pick one. Okay, I have to talk about my undergrad thesis. That was probably the most interesting I've ever done. And I think the reason I say that is because it was so different than like any of the clinical work I've ever done. So in undergrad, I did research on, if you've ever watched the movie Finding Nemo, like Nemo swims in between the anemone fish and doesn't get stung, but then Dory will always get stung when like they swim between the anemone fish. And I did research on why certain clownfish are able to live in a symbiotic relationship with sea anemone versus closely related clownfish are not. So there's actually a genetic factor of there's a mucus layer that surrounds fish, and clownfish have developed a genetic factor that causes them to have protection so they don't get stung by anemone fish, while other clownfish, other related species, don't have that genetic factor. So we were trying to identify what gene was causing the protection for these anemone fish, for these clownfish. And it was so interesting because I was able to do like every step. So I was able to breed clownfish. So I learned about marine life. I was able to go and see like, I went to UMass Dartmouth, so it's like right on the water. I was able to go to like marine life houses and like understand like how these fish live, breed the fish, get like raise babies, feed them, and then go all the way through like clipping some of their tails and like, like wiping off mucus to do the genetic analysis on these mucus, and then going through that process, developing primers, doing the bioinformatics to analyze my data. It was really a project where I was able to see it from start to finish. And because it wasn't like super clinical based, it was very much marine biology based. It was so like, it was so interesting because I was just doing it because I was very interested in that work, while like it wasn't like super translatable to, the clinic. It was very interesting. And I feel like I learned the most from that project. Like I learned how to handle animals, learned how to, do the wet lab stuff, and learned bioinformatics. So I always talk about that project also because it's super cool. Like everyone knows Finding Nemo, and it was just like the fun project. So yeah, that would probably be like my favorite out of all the research I've ever done.
That sounds really interesting. And I was going to ask you, since you're doing so much interesting stuff like research, as you mentioned, internships as well, and now you're in the medical field. During your path, what do you think was the one thing, if you had to pick, that inspired you to follow the path that you're following in terms of your educational career?
I think that actually came outside of research. So growing up, like I was like, I had an undiagnosed medical condition for like 16 years of my life. So I was in and out of the hospital. So I was very accustomed to like working with the doctors and the nurses. Like it was like second home. And then when I was diagnosed with my condition at 16, there was not really much information about it because it was a rare disease. But the one thing that I was told was that I would get better. Like most people they had followed when they, became adults, sort of like grew out of the condition. And that was like promising. And that's sort of where like my interest in research and medicine sparked. I was 16, I just started high school, and it was a researcher who sort of gave my family that information, but he was a physician, he was a pediatrician. And after that, I sought out opportunities to volunteer in the hospital. I sought out opportunities to do research through science fair. And that was sort of the factor that inspired me. And then everything after that just sort of confirmed that this was the field that I was very interested in. So yeah, I think it was more sort of personal experience than like the research I did, but it definitely stemmed from that whole experience. Like, you know, when you're the patient, you really understand like what it means to have good care. And when research is providing a patient with an answer to a problem, you see the power of research. So that was like sort of my intro to all of that.
That's really inspiring to hear. Thank you for sharing that with us. Especially since you are just out of your undergraduate program at UMass Dartmouth, do you think maybe you could talk about if you had any advice for the college application process and finding your match and applying?
Yes, I think my biggest advice is start early. You know, like I remember like applying to college was like, it was a lot. I felt like I was writing and rewriting and writing and rewriting. And you know, get advice from like your counselors, your friends, your peers to like read your college application essay. Also, don't sell yourself short. You know, like if you feel like you want to go to a school, but like maybe your SAT scores are a little lower than theirs or whatever, like, you know, if you feel like you would be a good fit, like don't sell yourself short. I feel like MSEph really provided me with a leg up on my application because I was doing research at such a like an early stage. And then in terms of like when you get to college, college is like a long 4 years, especially if you come in, you know, let's say you come in, you don't know what major you're in, or let's say you start as a hard science, like the science courses are very, very tough. So just make sure like if you're interested in pursuing a hard science, that you really learn in your foundation courses. Your foundation courses may not always be the most fun, but after you get through those and you're like really taking the upper level science classes, they're a lot of fun and they're very, very interesting. I remember taking a class on parasites, like the biology of parasites. And I like just signed up for it because I was like, why not? And it was probably one of the best class. And we just talked about parasites. And to this day, like it's stuff I use in medical school that we learn now. So just like keep an open mind, work hard. It's not going to be easy, but I feel like if you're able to make a schedule and stick by it and do well in your foundation classes, it'll really set you up for success. And even if you decide like not to do a science major, but you're still interested in like social science or humanities, like give it your all. Like those are still great majors, and we need more people in those fields as well doing research.
Definitely. Thank you so much for that advice. That will definitely be very helpful for a lot of the viewers watching. And I wanted to ask you, since you're in such an interesting field, what's a description of a day in your life currently?
Okay, busy is like one word to describe it. I can walk through like sort of like an interesting day right now. Like today, I'm just spending my day at school studying, so it's not really interesting. But let's say it's like a day, like last year, I'll describe a day. So we were able to participate in vaccine clinics. So as we know, like the COVID pandemic was something that was like really a part of our lives last year and still is at this point. But last year we were able to volunteer as vaccinators. So we were able to give people in our local community the COVID-19 vaccine. So, you know, I'd wake up in the morning, I'd probably like go to the gym and then come home and then get ready, throw on my scrubs, white coat, and then go to a community health center, or we were even vaccinating like at storefronts, like wherever I was assigned that day, I'd go. I'd meet up with like other medical students. We'd do like 3 hours of vaccinations, and then I'd come home. And then if it was a lab day, I would go to lab. So we have like anatomy lab and OMM lab, which is where we practice like our osteopathic manipulative medicine techniques as well as like clinical skills. So I'd go to lab for like 3 hours or 2 hours. And then after that, I was also SGA president of my class last year. So we'd usually have like a meeting in the evening to just discuss like things in regards to our class. So I'd probably go to like a meeting from like 6 to 7, and then I'd come home, eat dinner, and then get to studying. Studying for me just looks like sitting on my iPad, like going through lectures, doing like flashcards via Anki. And that's pretty much it. Usually in bed by like midnight and then repeat the next day, depending on the schedule. But it's mostly just like attending lectures. All of our lectures are on Zoom, so that's really nice. And, you know, studying.